Well, round 17 of the 2024 Formula One season was a thrilling affair with Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri having an incredible race-long battle, with the Australian finally breaking away at the end to take his second career victory. Leclerc avoided a huge late crash in the penultimate lap between Carlos Sainz, his teammate, and Sergio Perez to finish second, and George Russell picked up the pieces to finish third. Well, before we get cracking, here's a quick look at the result. And as we say, Oscar Piastri took the victory ahead of Charles Leclerc and George Russell. Lando Norris bringing it home fourth, starting 15th. Not a bad result for the McLaren driver. Max Verstappen, the championship leader, finished 5th overall. Fernando Alonso 6th. And a great weekend for Williams. Alex Albon and Colapinto, only his second career start, in 7th and 8th respectively. Lewis Hamilton 9th, and Oliver Bearman, yes, another person starting their second Grand Prix in the points, finishing 10th for Haas. Then it was Hülkenberg, Gasly, Ricciardo, Guan Yu, Ocon, Bottas. And finally, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda, all with DNFs. Well, joining me to discuss what was an epic battle, I'm delighted to have Filip, Cleeren and Ben Hunt with me. Gents, how are you doing? First of all, Phil, how are you getting on?
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm doing very good too. Off to Singapore shortly.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah, so it's kind of a short-ish hop. It's quite a long way, but it's a short hop for you, isn't it, Ben, from one to another? Phil, let's start with you. We witnessed an epic battle between Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri. What was it that led to the overtake, though, that allowed Piastri to go through?
Yeah, it was an interesting one because it looked like Leclerc was looking pretty comfortable, built up a 5-6 second lead, and then delayed his pit stop a bit because they were all concerned about doing so many laps on the hard tyres. And then, yeah, Piastri slashed the lead by almost undercutting him. And then I think Leclerc doesn't really know what happened either because he was sort of caught napping. Piastri made an amazing move from very far back. So Leclerc wasn't even thinking about defending. He went back to the line because surely Piastri's too far back. But then he made a 50-50% move, as he called it himself. Like, either I'm going to make a stick or I'm going to end up in the wall or in the runoff area. And it was perfect. It was absolute textbook. A late dive, just about managed to stay on the track. And then, yeah, took the lead. Didn't look like it was going to be easy from there, but that was like 50% of the job done.
It was an audacious move, though, wasn't it? Like you say, it was so late. I mean, he braked and braked and braked so late on, and he almost got it wrong. You say, or he says 50-50, but I think it was the odds were more likely that he'd end up in the wall than getting round than 50-50.
Yeah, I'm sure people at McLaren were also just scratching their heads as they saw him make the move. But yeah, it just shows he's a brilliant racer.
Yeah, and I think Leclerc, as you rightly say, was completely bamboozled by it. But Ben, after that moment, Piastri had his work cut out because Leclerc didn't let go. It was like a terrier with a bone, wasn't he? Just how impressive was Oscar Piastri in that defence?
Yeah, I think, Oscar I've been really impressed with this year and last year as well. I mean, it's incredible to think that it's only his second full season in Formula One. Only 23, but driving like he's 33. So I was talking to someone earlier on, and they were saying about the impact that he's made is similar to when Max first came into Formula One. But the difference is that Oscar's not really making any mistakes. The mistakes that he is making are largely going unnoticed. They're only little ones, whereas obviously Max's were a little bit more high profile. He's keeping it clean. I think for me, his biggest strength is that he's not flustered. We're not hearing any of those panicked radio messages that some other drivers do. He's so calm, and with that helps McLaren to make the right decision. If you've got a calm driver, then your race engineer's calmer, and it just helps to settle things down. And for a team that we've often spoke about, going through this learning process, you don't need a panicked driver at the wheel. You need someone that's calm and able to be assertive in what they're doing, and that's exactly what they've got with Oscar. Very assertive, as I said, not making any mistakes. He's given them a bit of a headache, really, because he's been so good. All the chat going into this weekend was papaya rules and, whether they should throw all their weight behind Lando. Well, you could always argue that they should always back a form driver. And if you're doing that, then that is Oscar Piastri. Scored more points than anyone else in the last 7 races. Only driver to finish every lap of every Grand Prix this year. He's doing the business. as I said at the start, I'm hugely impressed by him, and I think that he is going to give McLaren, and in particular Lando Norris, a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Looking at the championship points, actually, Phil, your thoughts on this, because you look at how they've approached the season. McLaren weren't expecting maybe to be where they are, but they've got these two drivers really going for it. I know, I'm sure you've spoken about it before ad nauseum, but for Lando Norris, it all went wrong at the wrong moment. He could have left Baku with a whole load more points than he got, but it was all thrown away in qualifying, wasn't it? And then that set him up poorly for the Sunday.
Yeah, it's quite a tricky situation because you can't just back one driver and then flip-flop after one result that goes the other way the next race. So you kind of have to stick with it because Piastri is still more than a Grand Prix win behind. It's 32 points back, so it's not like suddenly, you know, he's on the same footing in the championship. But on the other hand, I guess McLaren also sort of said that he's not going to have to yield 100% of the times. We've seen that, you know, Norris actually helped Piastri during the race by holding up Perez, avoiding an undercut for Piastri, and sort of played a role in Piastri winning the race. So they've always sort of presented it as we're one team, we help each other, which is a fun PR line, I guess. But I guess they did show that when the situation is like that, then they will help each other. But I don't think they will suddenly abandon it. They will still have to back Norris, I think, if the situation is there. But it's not always there. Because, as you say, Norris had a terrible qualifying because of a yellow flag that momentarily came on, and then he had to abandon his lap. People are slating him for going wide then, final corner, but I think he would have easily been in Q2, even with that. So it really was bad luck, I think, for him. And we don't know. We say Oscar is a former driver, and on points he is. In qualifying, he's generally been a bit behind the season. So we don't know where Lando would have qualified and finished. But yeah, I think it will be a bit disappointed because obviously Max wasn't particularly happy with the car. So he could have done some real damage here in Baku. And to only get back 3 points, I think, will leave him a little bit frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to Max in just a few moments. Just stay with Papaya rules, stay with McLaren for a moment then, Ben, because as Phil says, 32 points behind his teammate, Oscar Piastri, over Lando Norris. Norris is 59 points off the back of Max Verstappen, so that's 91 points that Piastri is off the back of the lead. If my maths is correct, it probably isn't. I'm probably way out there. I think it's about that. Anyway, if it's not, mate. Yeah. Is it right? Okay, well there you go. My school days paid dividends. There you go. So those are the points. That's the deficit there. So it is like Piastri's way too far back. And if you look at the performance between the McLaren team driver's performance, you could argue Norris actually had a really, really strong race. He did everything he could for the team, and when it comes down to what Piastri is going to need to do to help him later on in the season, it was a wise move, a wise drive, I think, by Norris to do what he had to do. He was no moaning on the radio when he was asked to do what he could do for one more lap. He literally said, how long? And they said, this lap, and he did the job. He got it done. So with that in mind, McLaren have got it right, have they? It comes down to team orders, like Phil's saying, you can't flip-flop your team orders or your decisions. That they're exactly spot on still, are they?
Yes, I think they're right. I think their mistake, and this pains me to say it from a media point of view, is actually talking about it in the media. I think that we have constantly asked the question, and they've always been very good and responded. Perhaps they shouldn't have said anything, because we wouldn't have known any different in terms of who they're backing. It's very awkward to come out and say, We've asked Oscar to support Lando's title challenge and then see Oscar win the race. It makes you look a little bit, perhaps a little bit silly. But I think that they should probably have kept that in-house, all those discussions. But they do obviously need, they've been open in one respect, and that's saying that they're tailoring it race from race. It's not like they have told Oscar that he's can completely be the sacrificial lamb in this pursuit for the Drivers' Championship. They've made it clear that they will obviously run both cars as if they're number one drivers, and call it accordingly. So it may be a little bit confusing for everyone, but I think inside it's just the team sort of hedging their bets and not making a mistake in making it 100% clear that they're backing one over the other.
Yeah, I think Andrea Stella's been very good about it, isn't he? And also McLaren can now look at this and say, look, we're leading the Constructors' Championship. How the hell has that happened? But here we are, we're leading the Constructors' Championship, we're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, they've been brutally honest. I think that's part of the refreshing aspect of McLaren under Stella's reign and Zach Brown is the honesty. You know, a few years ago they come out at the start of the year and said, look, this car's not going to be ready for a couple of races, and we were like, wow, you know, never heard that before. Normally teams pedal the narrative that, you know, we'll be thereabouts, but, you know, let's see where we are at the first race. Well, they were honest from day one and said, this car's not good enough at the moment. Judge us in a few races' time. And, you know, you've got to say that was absolutely the right attitude to have and the right thing to say, because halfway through that season, around the Austrian Grand Prix last year, things started to click and they started to make progress. And since then, they haven't looked back. And part of that is the management structure and being open and honest, not only with us, the media, but of course the drivers, and so that they're clear where they're at. I just think that this aspect of the two drivers now fighting for wins has brought another element which, you know, they've had to contend with, and they weren't too sure as to which direction they wanted to go, and perhaps they still aren't, because they feel uncomfortable with siding with one over the other. So I guess it's a learning curve for everyone, which is obviously good for the future, for next year, assuming that they develop a car, you know, that's quick and you know, looking good at the start of next year. I think that all bodes well for next year as well.
Certainly is boding well for 2025, not just for McLaren, but for quite a lot of teams and for the championship, which is very, very exciting. We're rubbing our hands together already, and we've still got quite a few races to go. One thing that I've read on the Autosport site, Phil, is about McLaren's rear wing, and I don't want to open up Wingate again, but it seems they've got this upgrade which is flexing a little under load.
Yeah, it seems we've sort of run out of things to talk about with their Flexi front wing, so we've moved it to the rear wing now. Yeah, it's just a constant game, isn't it, of teams trying to grass each other up and, you know, saying, look at what they're doing, look at what they're doing. We've heard from the FIA that everybody's complying with the front wing rules, so they're sort of satisfied with that, and they're not going to plan to make any stricter tests for the rest of the season. And now, yeah, people are looking at onboards of the rear wing that was sort of flexing. Again, that will be looked at. I don't think there's going to be any changes, but it's just a constant game. People look, you know, go to the edge of the regulations, and then, you know, based on onboard footage, it's easy to, you know, to spot an angle from which a competitor seems to be out of bounds. But it's a constant game, and I'm sure the FIA will look at it with the same vigor that they looked at the front wings, and we'll see what happens with it.
The crux of the story is that on static testing, the way they do it, it's within the parameters, and when it goes under load on track, particularly, it's flexing a fair bit, and people are arguing, oh, they're getting an advantage. But as you say, is it tattletale? We'll have to wait and see if anything comes out of it. Maybe people just tattletale, tittle-tattle, whichever way round we'll say it anyway. Is it any of those things? We'll have to wait and see. We've got a Grand Prix in just a few days' time, so I'm sure there'll be more discussion just there. Phil, one of the biggest moments that we saw in the Grand Prix was penultimate lap when Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, who I think we should say right now performed really well in Azerbaijan. We never give him the plaudits. I think we have to say, great to see Sergio Perez racing at the front end and the top end again. But there was a coming together at the end. Who was at fault for that one? Was it a racing incident, or can you put the fault at someone's feet?
Yeah, first of all, as you say, credit to Perez. He's gotten a lot of stick on the internet, in the media, and certainly on this podcast as well, which I thought was fair. So it's also fair that he gets praise when he was there. He looked in a fantastic position. He saw Piastri and Leclerc battle, take everything out of their tyres, and he was sort of just sitting there waiting to pounce at the end. And then he did pounce, sort of made a lunge at Leclerc that didn't work out, and got, you know, sort of mugged by Sainz. But it was a really clumsy one, because I think the steward said, you know, neither is predominantly to blame, so it's a racing incident. And I kind of agree with that, because obviously, particularly Checo is very upset with Sainz. But yes, Sainz, he comes off sort of, he changes his line a bit. He takes a normal racing line to try and get a toe from Leclerc, which is the normal thing to do. But then when there's a car alongside you, is that still what you're doing? Are you still entitled to take that line when somebody's overlapping with you? And then from Perez's point of view, yes, Sainz moves over like a car width, but he still has more than half of the track to his left, so he can react to it. He's behind, so he has the best perspective of their positions. So he could have, he just took a straight line and didn't respond. Whereas when Sainz moves over, he could have done a little bit more to avoid it by just steering left, which he didn't do. So I think both could have done a little bit more to avoid it, and I thought it was pretty clumsy, to be honest.
Yeah, clumsy, I think is a good word for it. I mean, Carlos was saying, what happened there, what happened there. Sergio Perez, I think, was beeped through his expletives there as well. I mean, Ben, you're nodding along as well. I mean, I watched it and I thought, well, okay, Carlos moves across a bit. It wasn't an aggressive move across. It wasn't suddenly like he took Perez completely by surprise. Perez had enough room to go, and I'm not going to start banging on Perez's door and saying he's at fault there. But he could have moved, couldn't he, Perez? He could have got out of the way.
He could have done. I was actually going to say I couldn't believe it took to that long in the race before the safety car came out. I mean, this is Baku. Baku throws safety cars every 2 minutes. It was surprising. It went on so long with. I think there was only one retirement at that point, maybe two. I'm not sure, but certainly not anyone through an accident. So he could have moved across. Disappointed for Perez. It would have capped a good weekend, I think, and taken some of the pressure off. I totally agree with Phil. I think that we have been critical, but for a reason. I think Red Bull have been critical for a reason, and it looked like it was coming together for him this weekend when it didn't his teammate. So that would have been a big boost. I think the performance right up until that point when he ended up in the wall.
Yeah, it has a knock-on effect with it. The constructors, definitely, and it's not the first time, unfortunately, one of the cars in Red Bull, and it always seems to be the same car at Red Bull, losing out points for the constructors, but otherwise it was a very, very good, very, very good weekend for Sergio Perez, although he leaves empty-handed, which is disappointing. We'll come to safety cars in a bit because we've got Singapore coming up, and it's always has a safety car, at least one anyway. Before we do, though, across the garage from Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, he had a weekend to forget. He finished 5th. He dropped 3 points off of his championship rival. 3 points is actually quite good. If you're going to have a bad weekend and only lose 3 points to Lando, who needs to be hunting down 8.5 points at Grand Prix now. But what can he take from this? There was an upgrade at Red Bull. Can he take some form of solace in that? What can they look at the setup? It seems to be a setup issue from free practice 3 to quali, doesn't it?
Yeah, they seem to have gone backwards. A mistake. We often hear that is sort of the excuse that usually Mercedes come forward over the course of the weekend. Everything starts well, and then they make changes overnight and then go backwards. It was a story that we actually heard at Red Bull this time. I think it's quite interesting seeing Max a little bit unhappy. The timing of it is all very strange. I mean, who would have thought, actually, going back to the start of the year when he won that Bahrain Grand Prix, that we'd be talking about him, scrapping and, limping almost over the line with this Drivers' Championship. I know he's still far ahead, but it looks like Lando's going to make it interesting. But, lots to focus on, I think, at Red Bull. And we're going to talk about Singapore in a minute, but that's usually a track that they struggle at. So it could be another moment of scrutiny for Red Bull, and obviously where they go from here. The news obviously into this last weekend, into Azerbaijan Grand Prix, was Adrian Newey's arrival at Aston Martin, and there's so much focus on filling the void left by him, and I think it's going to only serve to increase the pressure and scrutiny on Red Bull over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's also just a case of, you don't have the advantage anymore that you used to have, so you can't make mistakes like that. You can't get the setup wrong. Verstappen's pit stop wasn't very quick either, so there were some operational issues that maybe would have been papered over by how quick the car was in previous years, like certainly last year and the start of this year, whereas now you don't have that margin anymore. This was a circuit where Ferrari and McLaren were both very strong, so if you're not careful, you're the 4th quickest team, because Mercedes were also looking promising enough until the race at least. You have to get it spot on, because there's no margin for error. Like, Norris needs to have a perfect rest of the season to get the title, but by the same token, Max can't have these weekends. He has to, the car has to deliver, and they have some pace in the car. We know some of these circuits are going to be more difficult for them, including this one, including the next one. But there are circuits where I think Red Bull will be stronger again, and they have to start getting wins again, because otherwise this could still go wrong for Max.
And if you look at Sergio Perez's performance at Baku, for a circuit that they should struggle at, let's just say, because the results in more recent years, even though he won it last year, they'll look at this and go, okay, well, maybe we've turned a corner with performance because we've unlocked something. Okay, didn't go well for Max. But there are a couple of sprint races still to go as well over the course of the season. So we look at the number of points that Lando's got to gain on Max. He's got more than just the Grand Prix to gain those points back. So it is going to be very, very exciting with 59 points left. 59 points the deficit, between them. I want to move on to a few other drivers, though, because there was a cameo, we'll call it a cameo at Haas. Oliver Behrman, he out-qualified and outpaced his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. He also, very quickly on this, a fact about him, first 2 starts in Formula 1, he's scored points in both for 2 different teams, which is a record. Ferrari and Haas managing to score for both, Phil. So a decent cameo for Ollie Behrman. He's looking good, isn't he?
He is looking good, yeah. Overall impressive. Just to jump into a Haas, he has driven it before in FP1, but this was really impressive. Just another race weekend with a new team, and he's nailed it. I would say his weekend in Saudi Arabia with Ferrari was a little bit stronger on the whole, maybe, because obviously he's had this crash in FP3 that sort of left him on the back foot, because that meant he didn't have any soft tyre running, any qualifying preparation, and then he sort of made a little mistake in qualifying that saw him miss out in Q3. And I think I'm probably most impressed by his attitude, because he wasn't gushing about how well the weekend has been. He was sort of pointing towards the negatives, being self-critical, saying, oh, it could have been better. I should have been in Q3. It's that sort of the right attitude to have, isn't it? And then in the race as well, his first stint was actually very poor. So his pace was nowhere. And then it took for basically Haas team orders to let Hülkenberg through. And when he was following Hülkenberg, he could actually see, hey, there's way more pace in the car. I'm being way too conservative. And then he had a very strong second stint where he was battling with Lewis like a veteran. Very impressive. And yeah, to be rewarded with points, which was probably not on the board before that crash, but you need to take your opportunities. It's well done to him.
Yeah, I think his attitude has been superb, and when you talk to the people at Haas, that's the thing that they reflect. When he's got in the car for these FP1 sessions, they've given him the program to work through, and he's just done it. He's just delivered. He's not tried to impress anyone and put in a mega lap and stick it in the wall or do anything silly like that. He's done what is requested of him, and it takes quite a big driver to do that. I know it sounds silly, do your job, but a lot of them, if they get in, they just want to impress and show what they can do. Whereas he's been delivering for the team, his feedback and communication has been absolutely spot on. And then he's delivered on the weekend, on the Sunday when you need to. And I think that's, for me, maturity. And I think that he has a very bright future in Formula One. I'm really excited by his progress and just how he's handling everything, taking it in his stride. Super calm. Doesn't seem phased. I mentioned Oscar Piastri being, calm behind the wheel, and that's also the same as Ollie. Very impressive.
Another one who's been fairly impressive is the new boy at Williams. Let's just quickly mention Williams because they've had their strongest weekend of the season. Albon finishing 7th and Franco Colapinto finishing 8th in his second Grand Prix start as well. I mean, we know what happened to him last time out in free practice, but he's looking good as well. Could he force his way into a seat in 2025, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. It's looking like there could be a position potentially at the Audi Sauber situation. I was chuckling to myself just then, just thinking about these young guys coming through, and we're persevering with a lot of these drivers on the grid. No changes for this year, and of course, all of a sudden now we've got this fresh blood, and it's super exciting. We're talking about a championship that could go down to the wire, and then next year we've got all these rookies that coming in that seem totally unfazed, and are showing already that they can deliver. I would love to see him on the grid for 25, Colapinto. I think that he brings a freshness. His attitude is similar to Oliver, but he has more of a media personality. For me, something I'd really love to get stuck into talking to him and finding out more about him. Obviously, moving across from Argentina to Italy as a kid and doing all his growing up in the karting factory, and it's really been impressive to see just his progress as a young man, and then to get into the car and deliver. It's sensational. I'm really, really pleased for him.
Absolutely right. It's good to see what he's doing. I'm going to just finish this with Singapore, and I know, Ben, you need to get off to get to the airport to fly to Singapore. So I'm going to come to you first of all. What are you hoping to see out there, apart from a lot of sweat because it's a very, very warm place, isn't it?
Sweat, but I think we could be on for some rain. I think that would be really, really interesting. A wet race, it's a tough one. Add into the mix a wet track, and it could be anyone's come Sunday. I would love to see a Lando win just to increase that or decrease that gap and start putting more pressure on Max Verstappen, just from a championship perspective. But Colapinto, I'm excited to see how well he goes as well. A couple of good races under his belt, but this is going to be an acid test.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. It's definitely one of the hardest races on the calendar, certainly for a rookie. So interesting to see how Colapinto gets on. I suppose my focus will be largely on Red Bull, because we know Ferrari and McLaren are going to be strong enough. Red Bull are a question mark. They were abysmal last year, and we've heard several times from them this season that they haven't really solved that curb riding and that bumpy circuit problem, if you like. We've seen that at several races like Monaco as well. But yeah, they did bring a new floor in Baku, and as we discussed with Perez, it did seem to work a little bit better in terms of finding a better balance. We know obviously Max ruined his setup, but it seemed on the whole slightly more positive. We just don't know if that's really going to translate to Singapore, because that is just a whole different level of curbs and bumps. So yeah, it's going to be another round of damage limitation for Max, I would say. And then again, it depends. Is he going to be helped out by Ferrari? Is Norris going to lose points again to Leclerc or to Sainz, who took a brilliant win there last year? So sort of this competitors taking points off each other might well help Verstappen and Red Bull in the long run. So I'm interested to see what happens. I think McLaren and Ferrari are going to be very close. Mercedes, to me, are a bit of a question mark, because they look brilliant in one session and then nowhere in the other, or even within a race. George Russell was nowhere on medium tyres in Baku, and suddenly he was one of the quickest cars out there on the hard. So they are such a question mark that I don't really want to predict where they're going to be. But yeah, I think all eyes on Red Bull. How many points is Max going to ship to Lando into McLaren? As Ben said, now Norris is going to have a really good, clean weekend, qualify up front, because he just needs to pounce on these opportunities, because we don't know how strong Red Bull will be at other circuits.
Just on that one very quickly, we know you mentioned at the top just there how poor Red Bull have been, particularly last year. It was the only one they didn't win last year, and they finished 5th and 8th. Max finishing 5th, Sergio 8th. The year before, Sergio won it, and Max finished down in 7th place. So it's not a place that Max Verstappen goes to and really enjoys, it seems. If, and it's a big if Red Bull struggle in Singapore and McLaren get a decent points haul on them, maybe Lando wins it and he can claw back 20 points in the championship or something like that. What happens to the dynamic within Red Bull and McLaren looking forward for the final races of the season? Because surely Max is going to start getting very, very nervous. He sounds like he's already getting a bit nervous, but he's going to start looking over his shoulder even more. And we know drivers don't operate very well when they're looking over their shoulders.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it will, because he's been very vocal, especially in Hungary, about how terrible the car behavior has been, and the team not responding quickly enough or not finding the right solutions. But I feel like he's sort of shifted tone from that since then. And it has been 7 weekends without a win, and sure, he's frustrated, but he's sort of trying to make the best of what he has. I don't think he's all that worried about what McLaren are doing or what Norris is doing. It's just getting to the end of the season and just scoring the maximum points available. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some unease if he ends up losing the season within a Verstappen camp. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And questions will be asked about all these pillars like Newey, like Wheatley leaving the team. That is only going to increase if it does end up going wrong. But I think for now, Max is such a composed, level-headed driver now. I know he keeps getting stick for being fiery at times, but behind the wheel, I think he's just going to, it's going to be going into not autopilot, but just scooping up points wherever they are and make the best of the situation that he's in.
grind out the season and see what happens from Max's point of view. It's going to be very interesting to see how Singapore plays out. One thing we see at Singapore, I mentioned earlier, is a safety car. There's been a safety car at every single round. So how many safety cars, Phil? A wild prediction are we expecting to see? It's going to bring a safety car, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be foolish to bet against it, I suppose. Yeah, I can see 2 or 3 safety cars. We haven't had one for a while, haven't we? It's been several races without one, so I know we had a virtual one in Baku, but I suppose that doesn't really count. Yeah, okay. I can see, I can predict some chaos there. Yeah, we're due for some.
Safety cars are like buses. There we go. We should leave it there. Thank you very much indeed there to Ben and to Phil. Before we go, though, here's a quick look at the championships. And it's still Max Verstappen sitting on top of the pile, but the gap is just 59 points now to Lando Norris, who clawed back, well, just a handful last time out. 19 points separate him and Charles Leclerc, and a 13 points separate Charles Leclerc from Oscar Piastri. It's getting close, it's getting tight. Then it's Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, Russell, Perez, Alonso and Stroll. Still yet to score though, Guan Yu, Logan Sargent, well that's going to stay like it now, isn't it? And Valtteri Bottas. In the constructors, it is now McLaren at the top of the pile. What a swing that is. 20 points they now lead Red Bull in the championship standings. Then it's Ferrari. Only 31 points separate them and Red Bull now. I wonder if Red Bull can cling on to second. Then it's Mercedes, Aston Martin, RB, Haas, Williams, Alpine, and yet to score, it's Sauber. Well, there you go. That just about does it for our look back at Baku and our little peek at Singapore. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to stay across all the 4 days from Singapore over the next weekend. We'll see you next time, but until then, thanks for watching.